Hi, I'm Shashank Bhargav, and you're listening to Three Things, the Indian Express news show. Since last month, India's daily COVID-19 cases have increased 5 times, from 80,000 to more than 4 lakh a day now. And during this same time, the number of deaths that are being reported every day have increased almost 10 times, from 400 a day to 4,000 a day now. And these, of course, are just the official numbers. Anecdotal evidence and data from crematoriums suggest that the actual number of deaths could be much higher. And at this time, when cases are rising, vaccinating people becomes crucial. Because COVID-19 vaccinations lower your chances of being infected. And more importantly, they significantly reduce your chances of getting hospitalized. But right now, despite being the world's largest vaccine producer, India is facing a severe vaccine shortage. Several states have had to pause or temporarily shut down their vaccine drives. And it's not just India. Several other developing countries are also struggling to vaccinate their citizens. So a possible solution that is being proposed by some countries, including India, is that the intellectual property rights or IP rights of COVID-19 vaccinations should be waived off. IP rights in the form of patents are granted by the government, and they prevent others from copying an invention, or in this case, a unique COVID-19 vaccine. In this first segment, Amitabh Sinha, who reports on matters of science for the Indian Express, joins us to talk about this proposal and whether it can solve our current problem.
Now, the idea is very simple. There is a shortage of vaccines. There are limited number of producers of these vaccines, developers as well as producers. There are large number of people who need to be inoculated. The pace of vaccination is very slow. Lots of countries have given these vaccines barely to less than 1% of their population. So the idea behind this is let's free up the intellectual property rights over these vaccines, which will hopefully enable more and more companies to produce these vaccines, and therefore it will address the shortage.
Because right now, companies that developed COVID-19 vaccines, only they own the IP rights to them. And no one can manufacture their vaccines without an authorized license from them. A license which, of course, they charge a fee for. But if they waive off their IP, other companies can also produce their vaccines, which can lead to more vaccines, and that way more people can get vaccinated.
So that is the premise. And because of this unique situation of COVID-19, there is huge demand for vaccines. And probably right now, vaccines is the only way that is seen to be, only way out of this pandemic. Then the argument is that, look, this is a crisis. We need to save lives. This is biggest crisis that we have faced. And therefore, to cater to the fact that we need to save lives, we need to free up these intellectual property rights over the vaccines so that everyone can produce it. And therefore, we would be able to save lives. So that's the whole argument.
Now, this idea was first proposed by India and South Africa last year in October at the World Trade Organization, or WTO, which is an intergovernmental organization that regulates international trading between countries. 164 countries are a part of WTO, and this proposal by South Africa and India received the support of 120 countries. But it was blocked by countries like the US, UK, and the European Union. And so it did not pass. Because for something to pass in the WTO, it has to be unanimous. Everyone has to vote in its favor.
So even if one country, even if a very small country stands up and says, no, I don't agree to it, then it won't be passed. This is the way it works at WTO. This is also the way it works at the UN organizations. So every country has a vote and everyone has a veto. So that is what it would require, that every country agrees to it, at least doesn't oppose this move to free up the intellectual property rights.
Now, even though the US had blocked the proposal earlier and has historically been against moves like these, last week it announced that it is going to support waiving the IP rights of COVID-19 vaccines. saying that extraordinary circumstances call for extraordinary measures. This is what led to the idea gaining attention again. But soon after the US said this, German Chancellor Angela Merkel came out against the move. She said that doing this would create severe complications for the production of vaccines. And what Merkel says matters because she is considered a heavyweight in the European Union. So right now it doesn't seem like the proposal will pass. And even if it does, after long-drawn negotiations at the WTO, Amitabh says that this will not be a solution for the immediate crisis at hand.
It's not a short-term solution. It's not as if the waiver is going to come in a week's time, and in another week's time, you will see companies starting to produce more and more vaccines. So that's not going to happen. Even in the best case scenario, let's suppose that this actually goes through, and which seems very unlikely, but even if it goes through, it will take months and years, provided everything else also goes right. Like in one particular vaccine, there were some about 86 ingredients or something coming in from different vendors. Many of those ingredients would also be protected by intellectual property rights. And that's the normal thing to do. So, I mean, the entire production line or entire the supply chain would have to be freed up probably. I don't know how it's going to work out. But as I said, there are multiple levels of complications in this. It's not a simple case of you manufacturing vaccine, you as an individual manufacturing vaccine, and you not transferring that technology so that you can make profit. It's not as simple as that.
Plus, concerns, of course, are also being raised by pharmaceutical companies themselves, who stand to lose money if the IP rights are waived off. But even if that is the case, Amitabh says that their arguments are not entirely without merit. Like, they agree that this will not be a solution to the short-term problem at hand. Moreover, these companies are also raising concerns about safety and quality as well.
If we free it up completely, a lot of maybe spurious or dubious companies might also get into it. The quality of the vaccines might be compromised, and everywhere the quality checks probably would not be of the same standard which is required. That might lead to some amount of vaccine hesitancy. People might be very reluctant to take in vaccines. And at a time when we need people to have confidence in these vaccines, such a move might just turn out to be counterproductive.
The other argument that the pharma companies are offering is a standard one. That if other companies can make their vaccines, what incentive do they have to invest in R&D?
Pharmaceutical companies invest billions of dollars, on research and development, on clinical trials, and as we know, most of these clinical trials don't succeed. Most of the products that they come up with, the medicines, the drugs, the vaccines that they come up with, most of the failure rate is very, very high, to almost like 80 to 90% of the times the products don't make to the market. Now, the thing is, the companies still need to keep on innovating to be able to produce new and better drugs. So if they invest billions of dollars and come up with a product, and then that product is everyone is allowed to use that product and make profits on it, then what is the incentive for companies which are actually investing in R&D to continue investing in R&D? Because the smaller companies, the companies that would benefit from freeing up of the IP regime, they do not have strong R&D. They are not going to invest in R&D. They profit from someone else's efforts.
And Amitabh says that this argument has been used for several technologies in the past as well, including those involving climate change. Though there are, of course, strong arguments on the other side as well, that some of these companies got government support for the COVID-19 vaccines and were even given assurances that they would be bought. So this was a less of a risk for them. And that a strict quality check could be done for the companies that will make the vaccines after the IP rights are waived off. And of course, that pharma companies make a disproportionate amount of profits compared to what they invest.
So, as I said, there are very strong arguments on both sides, and it's a very complicated issue. It's not simple black and white that It's not a developing country versus developed country kind of debate also. It's not straightforward.
And the other thing to consider is that IP waivers are not the only thing coming in the way of increasing vaccine production. There are also trade barriers, issue in supply chains, scarcity of raw materials, and the rich countries unwilling to share doses with poorer nations. This is the reason why Amitabh says that this waiving of IPs and hoping that alone will increase production is a very simplistic idea and not a very realistic one. And India is a good case in point. The reason why we have a shortage, as we discussed in a previous episode, is actually because of lack of planning, the government not pre-booking vaccine doses, and exporting vaccines to other countries in a short period of time. And Amitabh points to other reasons as well.
Serum, for example, is the licensed producer for AstraZeneca vaccine. It is also the licensed producer for Novavax vaccine. Novavax has not been launched not because of IP protection, but there is some other issue with the supplies of ingredients from the United States. That's not because of IP. That's a separate issue that needs to be addressed, which Serum Institute has already flagged multiple times in public as well. And there are several other things in India that have happened in India which have led to the kind of crisis that we are seeing today. The fact that we probably depended too heavily on just two companies and just two vaccines to cater to the entire demand in the first few months. Now, of course, other vaccines are coming in, but the decisions were made when the demand for these vaccines was not seen to be that high. Now, suddenly the demand has shot up because of this second wave and reluctance of the vaccine hesitancy going down. So we seem to have miscalculated on the vaccine front. It has nothing to do with the IP regime. So India's case is a very good example wherein the shortage is not because of lack of technology or the IP regime blocking the manufacturing, but because of other reasons.
And now we talk about how Delhi and those living in slums of Mumbai are struggling to get vaccinated. We start with Delhi first. The capital, like many other cities in the country, is facing a vaccine shortage. So much so that those who got their first dose are now struggling to get their second. In this segment, Astha Saxena, who reports on health for the newspaper, joins us to talk about the issues Delhi is facing. Astha, with the ongoing shortage, many within the capital are struggling to get vaccinated. Could you first talk about what percentage of the population in the city has at least got one dose so far, and to what extent has the inoculation process slowed down?
So Delhi has a population of around 2 crores, and so far we have vaccinated around 38 lakh people. And of these 38 lakh people, 30 lakh have received their first doses and around 8.6 lakh have received their second doses. So that the vaccination, the drive started in Delhi on January 16, which was a countrywide vaccination, and it first started with the healthcare workers and frontline workers in the first phase. Then it moved to those 60 years and above, and gradually for 45 years and above with comorbidities, and next to opening the vaccination program for all above 45 years. On May 1st, we have started the vaccination program for the people between the age group of 18 and 44 years. So as we are expanding the vaccination program, the need for the vaccines is going up. However, we are not receiving the required stock that we need to vaccinate all these categories in Delhi.
And what are the reasons we assess for this shortage?
So if we look at the data that has been shared by the government, it states that till Wednesday, we have received 5.5 lakh doses of both the vaccines, including Covaxin and Covishield, and around 2.75 lakh has been utilized. But the number of people that falls under this category is massive. So if we look at those who are above 45 years of age, we have around 57 lakh people who are above 45 years of age. And for this, we will require around 1.14 crore doses. But we have only received 43 lakh doses to meet this requirement. So because of the ongoing pressure across the country, so the impact has been there in the state as well. So many hospitals who were supposed to receive more shots of Covishield or more shots of Covaxin are waiting for the suppliers or manufacturers to send them the details. And they are waiting for them to provide them the stock so that they can start the vaccination program for other groups as well.
And you write that many people who have got their first dose are now struggling to get their second one. How big of a problem is that?
So initially, during the first three phases, the vaccines were provided by the manufacturer to the state government, and the state government was then directing it to the respective hospitals. During the first three phases, the vaccine was free at a government hospital, and if you go at a private hospital, you have to pay a minimal charge of rupees 250. In Delhi, at that time, most of the private hospitals were offering Covishield, and many of the government hospitals were offering Covaxin. So the percentage of hospitals that were giving Covishield was much more than as compared to the Covaxin ones. So as the utilization for Covishield was more, the demand for that vaccine also went up. Now, those who got the first dose of Covishield are waiting for the second doses because now the shortage has suddenly arrived and now they are not able to receive their second doses. Many of the hospitals have stalled their vaccination program because they are waiting for the manufacturers or the state governments to provide them the vaccine. And even the state government has started raising the alarm over the shortage of vaccines. So if we look at Covishield, we have a period of 6 to 8 weeks. So if somebody is missing out on that, of course, there have been studies from London and other countries that say that we can have a period of 12 weeks as well. But our Indian government doesn't follow that, and we follow a period of 8 weeks. So most of the beneficiaries who have received their first doses are right now in trouble because they're not able to receive their second doses at any of the private hospitals. And even the government facilities, the rush is so more that they're not able to book a slot.
So, if the Indian government doesn't follow the 12 weeks guideline, what happens if someone does miss their 8 weeks window?
So the doctors are saying, because I was also worried about this thing, that since many beneficiaries are waiting for the second dose, they are saying that this can be extended for a while, but it can only happen in the case when there's an extreme situation. Like right now, we are in that situation that we are not able to receive the slot. So if somebody is missing out on that, we can have a buffer period for 1 or 2 weeks, but that is only if there is any emergency. If anyone is getting a slot in a government facility within 6 to 8 weeks of getting a vaccine, or during the stimulated period of time, they should get a shot of the vaccine.
And do we have an idea when stocks will be replenished in a way that the vaccine process could happen smoothly and as planned?
So right now, the government has been sending messages to the health ministry to increase the number of stocks in Delhi. But as of now, we haven't received any specific information that when these stocks will be replenished or when it will reach out to the hospitals. And for the second category, that is between 18 to 44 years, the private hospitals are directly dealing with the manufacturers. So they are also waiting for the manufacturers to respond as soon as possible. Like if we talk about many private hospitals that I spoke to, at Gangaram, they have halted the drive since May 1st because they haven't received any stock of vaccines. The hospital was administering Covishield at the time, April, and since May 1, they haven't vaccinated any beneficiary because they don't have the stock of the vaccine. Similarly, Fortis Healthcare, they are also saying that drive for the age group of 45 years and above has been impacted because of the shortage of the supply. So all of them are waiting for the government and the manufacturers to respond to their queries so that they can start vaccinating more and more people.
And in the end, we talk about Mumbai. Right now, any person between the ages of 18 and 45 looking to get vaccinated in India has to book a slot digitally on the CoWIN platform. And many of us, even with easy access to phones and laptops, have been struggling to do that. Sometimes the OTP doesn't come and slots are rarely available for people in many areas. So one can imagine that it must be so much harder for those who don't have easy access to smartphones and technology. For them, booking a slot is really hard. Recently, Sadaf Modak and Tabassum Banagarwala spoke to people living in the Mumbai slums about this problem. The situation in the city is also bad because pretty much anyone looking to get vaccinated for the first time in Mumbai right now has to book a slot online, even those above the age of 45. In this segment, we talk to Sadaf about why this has been done and how those living in slums have been struggling.
So over 40% of Mumbai's population lives in slums, and many of them do not have access to either smartphones or data packs. Also, some of them who do have access to those may not be as tech savvy to book vaccination slots on the CoWIN app. What has happened so far is that till last week, the BMC allowed walk-ins at vaccination centers where people could just go stand in a queue and get vaccinated without any registration. What has happened now is that because some centers reported crowding and there was an apprehension that it could lead to a law and order problem, the civic body has recently changed the rules regarding how vaccinations can be booked. Now, walk-ins are no longer allowed except for certain categories, including healthcare workers. And everybody who wants to register, no matter what their age, will have to first get registered on the CoWIN app and then get a slot, and only then will they get access to a vaccination center. This has created a big barrier for people who do not have access to technology or do not have smartphones, and that forms a major population from the slums. Anyway, though there is no proper record of how many people from slums are getting vaccinated, but from authorities say that the number is very poor.
So, when you spoke to those living in the slums, what are the kind of things they told you about the problems they're facing?
So my colleague Tabassum and I, when we went and spoke to people who live in these areas, they told us that a lot of them do not have a data pack. Some of them said that they got vaccinated because of an insistence by their employers. At the same time, some of them did get vaccinated through the walk-in registration, and they fear that the second vaccination that they will have to get access to will be through the pre-registration on the app, and they have no idea how that is done. The one problem that they said was that there was no awareness created about how one can get pre-registered. There were no volunteers who could come and tell them how it could be done. There is also a lot of misinformation about the vaccine in a lot of these areas, and there has been no concerted effort by any authorities to sort of clarify about what the vaccine is, what it will do, and at least allay their concerns about these issues.
And just talking about trying to book a slot or registering yourself online, how much of a problem is also just, finding time to do it? Because it does take a lot of time to get that right.
Correct. So laborer that Tabassum spoke to told her that, he does not have the whole day to sit and check when the slots are available. A lot of us are using third-party apps which alert us when the slot is available. That kind of luxury is not available for them who are sort of just getting by with the bare minimum registration and booking of the slot. So that is one problem. A lot of them do not have the luxury to sit and start booking at a particular time.
Right. And in your conversations with them, what are the kind of things that they are demanding from the administration right now?
So few of them said a lot of interesting things. They said that during elections, there is an electoral roll that they have, and they know how many members in each family. So they said that why can't that same process be used to ensure that they reach us? So for instance, one person I spoke to, they said that local corporator has set up an office where they are helping people pre-register. But they said that with the increase in numbers and the general apprehension in the locality, how many will actually go to the center and get information or get themselves registered in the absence of anyone having approached them about what the vaccine is, what it will do. What the people said, that there should be at least some level of direct interaction that needs to be done by the local representatives, by health officials who can come and tell them, explain the process. So that is one big missing chunk from what is happening.
And you mentioned that over 40% of the population in the city lives in slums. So how vulnerable is this population to the virus?
So, in fact, there are 3 sero-surveys done previously, which have shown that there has been consistent decay of antibodies among the slum population. So, for instance, last year in July, there was some 57% of antibodies found. To this year, it has reduced to 41%. So, there is a general apprehension also about how, if there is low inoculation coverage among these population, the third wave, whenever it comes, would affect them the most.
And in your piece, you also mentioned that there are some organizations that are helping people in these situations, trying to get them registered and trying to get them vaccinated. Could you talk about some of those efforts that we are seeing on the ground?
Right. So Tabassum spoke to a medical officer of the G North ward, which covers Dharavi. They have a team of data operators who assist people to register for vaccination, to book a slot online. There also is a public address system that they're using to create awareness about the vaccination. Similarly, in N East Ward, which is the eastern suburbs of Mumbai, one of the poorest in the city, a project called Community-Led Action Partnership is also helping people understand what the vaccine is. And also, one big problem is that corporators say that people have lost jobs and livelihood to an extent that they don't even have enough money to go to the nearest center which could be a few kilometers away and would cost you anything around 50 rupees, 100 rupees to go and come back in a public vehicle. So they're also arranging for vehicles to take people to the vaccination centers. So for instance, this initiative has ferried around 500 people from the MEST ward so far.
You were listening to Three Things by The Indian Express. Today's show was written and produced by me, Shashank Bhargav, and was edited and mixed by Suresh Pawar. If you like the show, then do subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. You can also recommend the show to someone you think will like it, share it with a friend or someone in your family. It's the best way for people to get to know about us. You can tweet us at Express Podcast and write to us at podcast@indianexpress.com.